Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler and today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. Because I usually do, but in this case this is a Dungeons & Dragons 5e beginner character creation lesson where I will explain the basics of building a character for the very first time. Now there are some basics that you require, but let's go over the overview for what I will cover for today. Character creation pre-check. What do you do before you even start making your character? The character sheet formats that are available, the character creation basic steps, advanced character details that you'll need to perform, some miscellaneous recommendations, and of course there's always an element where I cover a specific class, the essentials to a specific class. Now with all of the things that I do here on YouTube, I have some objectives. That is to explain what you need to know, demonstrate, and to have you participate in some way. And so therefore I'm going to do the same thing as I always do. Character creation pre-check. What do I mean by that? Well, I want you to check with the Dungeon Master what player character options are available for your game being run. What house rules does the Dungeon Master use for character creation and play? I want you to build the character for the campaign on the information provided. And if the Dungeon Master doesn't provide enough information, ask for relevant details that will allow you to know a bit more about the adventure and campaign without giving away spoilers, so that you can make a character that fits the game. Character creation always starts as a group discussion, because as it happens, your character is part of a team or part of a machine. So this is a group machine. When you're playing Dungeons & Dragons with a character, you're essentially playing a team sport. And so therefore you need to do everything together to actually ensure that you are successful. Design characters around the 3 pillars of play. So that's exploration, social interaction, and combat. You don't want a one-trick pony. You want to be able to experience the entire game rather than just one aspect of it. Ask what ability score method is going to be used and when. Are you going to be using the point-buy system, the standard array system, or will you be rolling dice? Now, if you're rolling dice, you need to make sure you know which system you're going to be using, because some Dungeon Masters use a slightly different version to the one in the player's handbook. And when you're rolling your dice, make sure you do that in front of the Dungeon Master. Determine what hit point method is going to be used. Are you going to be using average, or will you be rolling for those hit points? And again, when you're rolling for those hit points, make sure you do that with the group in front of the Dungeon Master so that nobody can accuse you of cheating. That is the basics in terms of the pre-check that you need to engage in when you're building your own character. Character sheet formats. There are about 4 different types available to you. The first one is your standard paper character sheet where you would use a pencil. You can use a pen. I recommend using pencil because you will be rubbing stuff out, and pen cannot be rubbed out unless of course you're going to use Twink. Fillable PDF character sheets, very popular now. You just need to make sure you sign it once you've done all your changes, and then that should save it. And you can go back and edit those. So a fillable PDF is very good. You also have D&D Beyond has a character builder where you can build it online on their website, and it will also allow you to print it out. There are also many third-party character builders and character sheets available, so you aren't limited at all. There are so many different options available. So that is the basics around the different formats for your character sheet when you're making your character. Character creation basic steps. What do they look like? Well, we're going to start off with, you need to select the level for your character that you're starting at. Write it down on your character sheet. Not all games start at level 1. Some start at level 3, some at 5. So check with your Dungeon Master what level your character will be starting at and make sure you build your character for that level. Select the class for your character and write down the relevant details on your character sheet. You'll find the classes in the player's handbook on page 45 to 119. There are supplements that have additional information if you want that, but always again, you need to check with your Dungeon Master before going to those. Select the race for your character and write down the relevant details on your character sheet. I have to say you'll find the vast majority that you're probably going to get to use in the player's handbook on page 17 to 43. There have been so many changes to races now that you may have to look at other books, so check with your Dungeon Master what supplements they are using. Select the background for your character and write down the relevant details on your character sheet. The backgrounds you'll find in the player's handbook on page 125 to 141, and you I'm going to make it clear now. You do not need to pick races and backgrounds that are optimal for a class. You can just pick whatever you want, okay? That's going to work for you and for the group. Select your feats for your character if you get any and write them down on your character sheet. Feats are in the player's handbook on page 165 to 170. Again, you don't normally get feats necessarily at level 1 unless you're playing the variant human, but some dungeon masters give out feats at level 1, some give them out at higher levels. You just need to check with them before you start engaging in feats. And not all dungeon masters use feats, so don't assume that you can use feats if you are building your character beyond level 4. It's got 6 ability scores, so you need to determine those. You need to figure out what method has been approved by your dungeon master. We had that discussion already. You'll find that the different methods for actually determining the 6 ability scores, which is strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. That's in the player's handbook on page 12 to 13. So that is your basic steps, okay? Once you've got all that, you're ready to move on to the next part of the equation. And this is where things get more complicated. If you're playing a spellcaster, you're going to need to select spells for your character. I would recommend that when you are selecting spells for your character and you are a spellcaster, write down the relevant details on your character sheet. So write down what spells you have, but also a page reference for all of those spells, because it's quite difficult to memorize them. When you're starting out, I would suggest a page reference. You'll find most of the spells are in the player's handbook on page 207 through to 289, but other books do have more. Select and buy equipment for your character and write down the relevant details on the character sheet. Equipment is in the player's handbook on page 143 to 161, and I would recommend selecting equipment and buying, so do a combination rather than just one. The worst part of the character sheet, I know what you're thinking. Calculating, it's all that maths I have to figure out. Calculating ability modifiers, your proficiency bonus, figuring out your skill modifiers, your saving throw modifiers, your armor class or AC, hit points, initiative, passive perception, weapon attack bonuses, weapon damage formulas, because there's so many different ones, your spell attack bonuses, and your spell saving difficulty class. So there's so many different things you need to calculate. It seems quite overwhelming, but there's always a process to this. And of course, lastly, select or draw a character portrait. This is not vital, but it does help connect your concept and your imagination to the physical medium that you are working with, which is probably a digital form of your character sheet or a paper version. I will say this, that there's something to be said for having a paper version. Even if you have the digital form, sometimes technology goes haywire. So it's always better to have a paper backup just in case. Now, with all of the things that I do here, I always give you some miscellaneous recommendations. So I do have some recommendations for you. This is updated from what I normally talk about. The character class backgrounds, like the different backgrounds for your characters. They can be anything that you want it to be. Okay, you do not need to select them to be optimal or optimized for your class. Okay, they don't need to be optimized for your race. Just pick what you want. You can also adjust them. There is a section in the player's handbook that says you can make your own and adjust them. You just need sign off by the dungeon master. And this will wind up being the default in the future anyway. What race you select no longer has any real bearing on the character class, so don't worry about optimal races for classes. None of that really matters anymore, because with Tasha's and the new flexible rules that are available, you don't need to worry about that sort of thing. You can even create your own race provided you have sign off and approval from your dungeon master. But there are many options out there now. Select adventuring gear. My recommendation is don't just take the selected standard pack. Do that by all means, but you also want to go and get yourself some more adventuring gear. It's easy. Any player character can do it. You're not restricted at all. It helps prepare you and it will assist you when you're adventuring. I've done a whole series of videos that talk about how to use mundane adventuring gear. It's cheap. You're going to have at least 10 gold pieces when you start out, if not more. So go and spend it on something that you can use in your game. I'm also going to mention something that I've said before, and that is note down the page number in the player's handbook or whatever book you're using for any of the spell descriptions, because they're quite complicated, some of those spells. I've mentioned this already, but you want to do the same thing for race abilities. Any race abilities that you're not familiar with, write down the page number beside it when it's on your character sheet so you can actually go and refer to it, because often the character sheet cannot hold all that information. Also, any kind of features regarding your character class. If you're playing a bard, all your features, make sure you have a page reference so you can go to that page and look it up when you need to. And also any information around your background feature. There's usually a background feature with every background offered. Sometimes they're easy to remember and sometimes they're not. I'm hoping that this was useful to you, and if it was, fantastic. I'm really happy to hear that. Please let me know in the comments section what you found useful, and if you have any questions, put them in the comments section. If you have any feedback, please give it to me. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.